Uh, I think most of you know who I am, but if you're new here, my name's Kim and I've been a prison chaplain for about 20 years, retired now. I was 10 years or so at a Bathurst jail and 10 years here in Newcastle. I came up here in 2008 to start a post-release chaplaincy, working with people coming out to make any decisions that are made, and they make good decisions, as you've heard from Tom, to make that sort of thing stick a bit so that they wouldn't break into a house and pinch a TV set. And so I've got a great deal of affection and respect for the work of Prison Fellowship do, so I recommend that. I've spoken about Kairos a few times when I've been here. There's two organisations come into jail. One is Kairos, one is Prison Fellowship. And they work quite differently and complement each other in what they do. So I recommend both of them to you. I'm going to start with a little video. Remember I did Bill and Ben a while back? And then I did the little, the ferret mum who wanted her owner to look at my babies. Even ferret mums want to show off their babies. That was just a heartwarming thing. Well, today we're on penguins. That's it, thank you. There's a bunch of photos towards the end of what I'm speaking, before we need the first one. So if you'd just like to leave the penguin, no, let's not have that. We'll just go back to the penguin. Can you do that? That's fine, we can put it on again. We've got a few penguins here in the congregation. I wonder whether they know who they are. Can anybody point to one of our penguins? Luke, can you stand up, please? Darren? Greg? Just stand up, don't have to come up. We just want to sort of say hello, and because people are wondering, why are they penguins? Well, I'll tell you. They are penguins because they went back into the world that they'd been in of addiction, and they got brought out of it, and they've gone back into it with Quilla Rehab. Here's the Quilla champions. And they're talking to other people about what's happened in their lives, and that makes you a penguin, doesn't it? This sort of a penguin. Thanks for standing up, I appreciate that. You can. I was going to say you could sit down, but the thing with penguins, you don't know whether they're standing up or sitting down anyway. So get comfortable. I'm going to talk about today going back. And that little penguin there, you can find that. They are called rock hopper penguins. And this is from the Falkland Islands, this little video. So it's on YouTube. You can chase up the rock hopper penguin. Say that. The rock hopper penguins. The rock hockers, sounds like they're taking rocks to cash converters for money. The rock hopper penguins of Falkland Islands. And that's that little video. They're just totally delightful. Penguins are always lovely. Everyone loves penguins. We especially love our penguins here who've gone back into the world to bring others out where they used to be. I've got a Bible reading for you. This is taken from the Gospel of Mark. You can follow on if you like. It's chapter 5. I'm going to start from verse 14 in the reading here. Now, the story doesn't start there. I've left out the longer part of the story because I'm interested in what's happening in the second part. So I'm reading from Mark 5:14, if you want to follow with me when I get there. The background of the story is Jesus and his disciples were in this area, and there was a man who was chained and is possessed by a whole bunch of demons, and he's crying out, and the demons are crying out, cursing Jesus. And Jesus cast the demons out. They said, don't throw us back into the pit. And so he cast them into the lake. They leave this guy, and he casts them into a bunch of pigs, and the pigs run down the hill and into the lake, and the man is freed from the things, the demons inside and the chains that he was bound with. He was outside the city. No one wanted him in the city because he was a total pariah. And then the news got around, and this is when we start from verse 14. The herdsmen fled. That's the people looking after the pigs, and told it in the city. I can imagine someone's just made all our pigs run into the lake. That's a thing to sort of complain about. Let's get the sheriff. And people came to see what it was that happened. And they came to Jesus and they saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion means the many spirits, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. I want to pick up that verse, and in his right mind. That's such an important thing. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged that he might go with him. And he did not permit him, but he said, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis. Decapolis just means 10 towns. So it's a bit like saying, go back to the western suburbs, or, sort of a region that he came from. And he began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marvelled. This is the story of someone going back. It is such an important thing that we go back and tell others what the Lord has done for us. And so I've got a few stories. You know me, I'm full of stories. We're 2 o'clock we finish, isn't it? I've got a few stories of prison again. Wouldn't you know it? Here's Kim talking about people in jail again. Well, it's the place where God has done extraordinary things. And so this is an extraordinary thing of a guy named Sam. That's his real name, by the way. He doesn't mind having me tell his story. And also, it happened 20 years ago. So the Sam we're talking about now, who was then in his early 20s, is now twice that age. I first met Sam when I walked through the workshops one time. We had a workshop that got all the returns of kettles and toasters that men buy for their wives on Mother's Day, and the next day Mum takes them back to the shop to get the money, can buy something that she really wants. Well, all those kettles and toasters, don't do it, fellas, don't do it. Buy an electric drill if you want to, but don't buy a kettle or a toaster. That is just the pits. Anyway, so all those returns, whether they're working or not, they get palleted up, and guess where they end up at? Bathurst Jail. And at Bathurst Jail, the inmates on a bench, they pull them apart, they check them, so they've got electricians officers who supervise all this, they check them to make sure that they're working and electrically fine, and if they are, they just put them back in the box. They put a stamp underneath, like a little soldering iron, go shh, with maybe an S for seconds, or some sort of symbol, and that goes back then, all the good ones go back, and they get sold off by auction, and they get bought up by motels and caravan parks and people who just need a supply of kettles and toasters and things. If they can't make it work, well, it gets thrown away. So the jail gets $2 for every one they throw away and $5 for every one that works or something. There's some sort of fee involved. It starts to earn money for the guys and for the jail itself. So this is where I met Sam. Sam was a Muslim guy. I'd not met him before. I came in and there's this new fella and just saying g'day, and I said, "Go, mate, I don't think we've met. I'm Kim." And he said, "I'm Sam." And he said, I said, "I'm the chaplain." And he said, "You're a Christian?" And I said, "Yeah." And he comes from Lebanon. Dark hair, darkish or mid-brown skin, dark eyes, good-looking fella. And he said, "So do you pray?" And I said, "Yeah, I pray." And he said, "How many times a day do you pray?" And I said, "Well, I start each morning with the time of prayer in the chapel, and then as necessary. Sometimes I'm praying with people through the day." And he said, "Well, I pray 5 times a day," and which is the Muslim code. Certain times of day, and right through the night. There's hours. Get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and pray, and then he sort of talked about, "You've got to pray, And I said, "I agree." And he said, "The importance of prayer you can't overemphasise." I said, "I agree." And then he said, "Do you read the scriptures?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "How much do you remember?" And I said, "I've got a whole lot of Bible verses, mate. They're in my head since I've become a Christian about 20. And he said, "So do you remember whole passages?" And I said, "I don't remember whole passages as if I'm learning a play, kind of, learning everything, but I remember key things." And he said, "Well, we've got people who can remember the whole of a Quran in a row." And I said, "I know, it's very commendable." And he said, "Well, you should be able to remember the scriptures." And I said, "I agree." And he told me all this stuff. And I mean, this is conversation. This is a very particular kind of conversation. This is the conversation with somebody who isn't prepared to let me in. and he's got a fence up. And that fence is his own sense of controllable space. Now, he was a nice guy, and he was regular he became over time, I recognised, that he was regular at the Friday prayers. The Muslim chaplain, local businessman, would come in from outside for Friday prayers. So Sam was there, and he would round up the other guys, make sure that they, sort of kept their faith. And we had a Kairos program coming up. We used to do Kairos in May and November, twice a year. And this is the November one. So I invited him along because we would often invite one of the Muslim guys just as hospitality. And they'd say, well, I'm not a Christian. I say, no, mate, look, it's just hospitality. We just want to recognise that you've got a position in your own community and we honour it. And so, come along. Anyway, he came along. He was nervous about it. The thing that made him really nervous, this is November after the September 11 attacks in New York. So as a Muslim, he was very nervous coming into this Christian environment. What he found there was love and acceptance and just absolute respect. And he got up at the end and he spoke about that. The Kairos programs have a final closing ceremony. Visitors come in from outside, pardon me, and he got up and we asked 3 questions, and it's on the lectern. And we say to guys, we'd just like you to answer these 3 questions if you'd like to. Question number 1, in what spiritual condition did you come here? Question 2, what did you find here? Question 3, in what spiritual condition are you leaving? And he got up and he said, well, I came here with a lot of fear as a Muslim coming into a Christian thing. And he said, what I found here is just respect and love, and what I'm leaving with is new respect for everybody that I've had to do with here. It was really quite a change. Well, then he said to me, and this is the crunch of Kairos, this happens so often with the Kairos program, and I put a lot of effort into supporting the Kairos program because they were doing so much of my work for me in breaking open these hard nut kind of characters. And a lot of people would come to me after a Kairos program and say, can I see you in your office? And I say, sure thing. So I'd make an appointment. So Sam came to me and said, can I see you in your office? And I said, yep. And he stood there and he said, well, he didn't, he sat on the chair, and he said, can I tell you what my life has been like? And I said, sure thing. And this guy grew up in Beirut, Lebanon. Now, just as Israel is bombing, I was going to say bombing the shit out of Lebanon, but I won't say that. But they did it, the equivalent, 20-something years ago. When this guy was growing up, actually more than 20 years ago, when this guy was growing up. In those days, it was Syria and Israel decided to have their war in Lebanon, and they just caused enormous destruction to this country that had nothing to do with either of them. Well, Sam was a little kid, 8 or 10 years old, and a bomb came into the block of home units. He had a twin brother, and the twin brother was killed in the explosion. And so he survived, and everybody around, and he didn't handle that very well. He said, I just sort of fell in a heap and my behaviour became very bad. And everybody used to say, they'd say to my parents, oh, isn't it terrible? God has taken the angel and left you with the devil. So I just became known as the devil, so I started to act like it. He spoke about his father was in the army. He spoke about the day that he grabbed his father's service revolver and he went to school ready to shoot his teacher, which he didn't do. But what 10-year-old is doing that? He spoke about a suicide attempt which failed. And then it got to the point where his behaviour was just getting so extreme and hard to manage. His parents didn't know what to do, and they had relatives in Sydney, so they sent him out to his uncle in Sydney to get him out of Beirut and out of that whole environment. And that's where he grew up. And then he got involved with drugs, and he was in jail on a drugs charge. So he told me this story. And he just sat in the chair and he said, will you pray for me? And I said, if you, as a Muslim, are happy to have me, a Christian, pray for you, I'm happy to pray for you. So he said, I'm happy with that. So I just sat in the chair beside him. I said, just hold out your hands. So I hold out your hands like this and just sort of in a receiving kind of manner. We'll just pray that God will give you some gift into these open hands, ready to receive. And I just held onto his fingers. And I said, now, I'm going to start praying, but it'll get so that it's no longer in English. And you won't understand any of the words. You won't understand what language it is. That doesn't matter. We're just asking God to do stuff. So I just started praying in English that God would put some gift into Sam's life. And then I just started praying in tongues, and a minute, two. And then he just went, and I sort of laid his hands on his lap, and I thought, this is good. You know, any movement above the waist is a bid, as they say in the auctioneer. And so he slumped, and I just kept on praying. Whatever that is, God just keep doing it. And then he's there and he said, wow. And I said, Sam, without opening your eyes, without interrupting what's happening, tell me what is going on for you. And he said, I can see myself. And I said, where are you? And he said, on a riverbank, and my family is down there. We've had a picnic. All my family is down there. We've had a picnic. And I'm walking up by myself up the river. And then he said, oh. And I said, what's happened? He said, there's light on me. And I said, where's the light coming from? And he said, up there. I mean, you know, the body language isn't working for here. He said, up there. And I said, tell me about the light. And he said, I'm shining gold. So here's this mid-brown skin, black-haired, dark eyes guy shining gold. And I thought, I'm not going to beat that in anything I say. I just kept on praying for him. And so I just kept on praying, and then that's all he said. He didn't say any more. And he just stayed there. And it got to the point where I thought, I think I've prayed enough. We'll just let God continue what's happening here. And then it got to the point where he started to move again. And he came up and he said, did I go into some kind of trance? And I said, no, mate, I think God wanted to do a bit of heart surgery. And he just needed to give you a bit of anaesthetic. You know, he just needed your attention. And I said, do you remember what you spoke to me about? And he said, that light. And I said, what do you make of that? And he said, I don't know. And I said, I think God was trying to tell you something about how he sees you. And I said, do you know how long we've been here? And he said, oh, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15. And I said, we've been here for nearly an hour. And he said, what? And I said, you've been 40 minutes since I spoke. And since you told me about the light, you've been sitting here, whatever's going on, for 40 minutes. God has just been doing stuff inside. And I said, so what do you want to do? And he said, I think I might just go back to my slot and lie down and sleep. And I said, good idea. I mean, after a lot of these deep things, people get fairly exhausted. You know, where they look like it's relaxing, but the change is happening. And so he's having something of a blood transfusion. Does that make you exhausted, doctor? There's a few things that make people exhausted. Well, I went to catch up with him in the workshops a couple of days later. Different Sam. There was none of this protective behaviour or protective language. He didn't challenge me anything at all about whether I wanted or whether I was praying or enough for to suit him, and he wasn't making judgment on my life. And then not long after that, he got transferred, which happens to people, you've heard from Tom. People get classified as their security level goes down. Often they'll be sent to a different jail. He got sent to Junee. Well, I was in Junee some time later with a bunch of chaplains. We were riding around on motorbikes, visiting country jails, and the head chaplain was there. You'd get local clergy, and he'd try and get clergy to come in for half a day a week or half a day a fortnight into places like Brewarrina and Broken Hill and a couple of little old jails and then in towns that I've forgotten. So we just rock up, and half a dozen of us on big motorbikes and leader bikes and 1200s and stuff, kind of impressive for people in jail. And it'd just be a conversation starter. What's God doing in your life? What's next for you? How are you going? And so we finished up at Junee, where there is chaplains, but we got invited to a Kairos night. Now, the thing, if you've done Kairos in one jail, you can go to the follow-up that happens mostly weekly or fortnightly in any other jail you're in. So he walked in and this guy walked up to me and he was all in prison greens, black beanie, a black scarf right around his face, and this muffled voice says, "Guess who this is?" And I said, "Darth Vader." and then I could see through the gap these black eyes, laughing. And I said, "Sam," and he pulled it down and he gave me this great big hug. And he said, "They told me you were coming." And I said, "It's good to see you. How you been?" And he said, "I've been waiting for you." And he said, "I've got a friend. He's getting out in 2 days' time and he's afraid of what might happen when he gets out." And I said, "There's a friend of mine who's coming down, and when he prays for people, God does stuff. I want you to pray for my friend." So I said, "Well, I can't refuse an opportunity, can I?" And so we prayed for this guy who was nervous that when he got out, it was just going to be the same as it ever was. And so, but here's this guy. So Sam, in a sense, is like a penguin. He'd gone back into this environment and he said, "This is what God has done for me. He can do it for you." Now, he wasn't telling the guy to read the Quran and pray 5 times a day. He was just saying, God can do this for you. He was a penguin. He just went back. See, like these guys. Let me think of... I'm just trying to keep track of my notes here. You can tell I've only got one-line notes here, so the less notes I have, the longer it takes, everyone. That's how it is. Another story of a guy named Don. Don Sweetman was his name, real name. Don was a footballer, south of Sydney somewhere. So he was in the junior squad, either for St George or the Rabbitohs or one of those south of the, southern part of Sydney teams. Looked like maybe moving in. He never really got up into first grade stuff, but he used to play some of the B grade games. But he was an alcoholic. And he had a bad moment one time and he decided, "I'm going to have to go and rob the grog shop." Now, I don't know why. Well, if you're an alcoholic, I suppose you rob a bank and you buy the grog, or you just go and hold up the grog shop. What are you going to do? Give me a bottle of scotch? But he went in with his hand in his pocket. Notice I'm wearing pockets. See, everyone said, "Are you going for an interview today?" Well, no. Anyway, he had his hand in his pocket and he said, "Just a stick up, Well, guess what? That didn't work. He got caught. But as soon as you walk into a business and put your hand in your pocket and pretend you've got a gun, guess what you get charged with? Armed robbery. You don't get charged with finger robbery. You get charged with as if you've got a real gun. So this guy ended up in Long Bay Jail, and he was doing something like 5 or 6 years, and he met another chaplain. The chaplain's name was Gary Ring, who, Tom knows Gary, and the thing about Gary Ring is he'd done time in his earlier part of his life, and he'd gone back into prison chaplain. See, Gary was a penguin. He'd gone back in. And he, with his ministry to Don, Don come to faith. And then he finished his jail thing, and he got outside, and he joined a local church, and then he started training for the ministry in that local church. And after 2 years, he said to Gary, he kept in touch with Gary, and he said, "I'd like to come in and help you with the chaplaincy." And Gary said, "Well, you can't do that without being 10 years outside. They won't let you in. Within 10 years, you've got to prove that you can, handle it." And he said, "Well, how do I get past that?" And Gary said, "Well, I don't know. We'll just see." Well, what happened in the end was that Don ended up with a letter from the Minister of Corrections with permission to go into jails only after 3 years of being outside. It's the only time I've ever heard it happening. So his life must have been so radically changed that the minister would do that. Now, being the Minister of Corrective Services it's a hot potato job. No one wants it because you're going to get, the opposition just throws buckets of stuff at you all the time. And so here's Don, and he was a penguin. He'd gone back in to talk with the guys about what God had done in his life and can do for you. The next guy is Rod, who's ended up being our chief chaplain in head office. Rod was kicked out of home at 14, lived in Green Valley area out in the western suburbs of Sydney. Now, Rod is in his early 70s, and we're still friends, Rod and I. We ride motorbikes together. We're heading off for a week. In a week's time, we head off, a bunch of us. And so at 14, kicked out of house, and some people said, "Yeah, you can move in. We've got a place you can stay. So guess where that was? That was with the motorcycle club called the Finks. So at 14, he was sort of the mascot of the Finks. Joined the Finks, got a motorbike licence, all kinds of crime, speaks about stuff they were doing, and which I won't speak about here. Ended up in jail, drug stuff, come out of jail, managed to join the army, got kicked out. He was up at Singleton, managed to get kicked out of the army when he was in Singleton because of drug use. And then somehow or other, he come to faith. He got involved with a community, Christian community, in a suburb called Bundeena, which is down south of Sydney, on, I think, Port Jackson, the end of the Georges River. If I've got my map in the right order. Anyway, Bundeena had a Christian community. It was really quite famous. And so Rod came to faith, and he lived there for about 2 or 3 years, and they discipled him on how to be a human and how to be a godly person and just how to be a man of faith. And he decided he was going to train in youth stuff, and he ended up working at what is now the jail at Windsor, but in those days was Darrick Juvenile Detention Centre, boys' home, which it was called. It was militaristic. He didn't like that. It was just too harsh. And so he then decided to go into the ministry, and he became an Anglican priest, and then into prison chaplaincy. And he was chaplain out here at Bathurst, and now in head office. Now, Rod is the most extraordinary person, but he's a penguin. He's someone who went back. So he come out of jail, he come out of the motorbike club, and he stayed with the motorbikes, which I can understand, because once you got the motorbike virus, bad news, fellas, it's going to be with you forever. And then I can remember when I got the virus, when I was about 15. I'll tell you in a minute, looking at the time. We've got a few minutes yet. And that's Rod. So the guy, can you imagine that? Can you imagine corrective services? And New South Wales supports chaplaincy like no other state in New South Wales. They put enormous financial resources and support into chaplaincy, and they give it good respect. Can you imagine corrective services said, okay, we need a chief chaplain. Let's get someone who is a member of a motorcycle gang, like an outlaw gang, drug addict, and in jail, and got kicked out of the army. They're the 4 requisites. Can we find someone who will tick those 4 boxes? Well, luckily they don't ask that. Luckily, what happens is God works in people. And God says, I don't care where you come from. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what chains have held you down. I don't care how much your mind is totally stuffed up. Because I know that when people see you in your right mind, then you're a different person and things can happen. And corrective services somehow saw Rod in his right mind after years and years of all this stuff. I'm going to spend the last few minutes just talking about when I went back. Can we have that photo 1, thanks? I went back. Now let me just see whether this works. Whoop. Okay. This is a bell tower. It's not a real bell. It looks like a big Christmas ornament. It's just 4 panels. But it's there as a memorial. Can we have photo 2, please? It's a memorial to this bell tower, which used to be on the same site. And you can see that this is some place. You see there's people here. See these people. Guess what? They're all a bunch of boys that I used to live with, and this is the boys' home that I lived in when I was a teenager. Next picture, please. And this is it. So the bell tower used to be here. And this is the former St Andrew's Home for Boys. Can we have the next picture, please? We go back underneath the bell tower. I'll get out of people's way here. If we go back underneath the bell tower, we've got, you can see this is the bell tower is this structure here. And they've got these bronze sculptures here of these boys as a memory, a memorial in a way, that it used to be a boys' home on this site. The problem is these boys are probably, 5, 6 years old. There was never boys that age in this boys' home. They were mostly teenagers. The youngest probably 10 or 11. Next picture, please. This is the real look of the boys who were there. These are boys who were there when I was there. So these are my brothers from that boys' home. And 60 years later, this is Mark, this is Duncan McDougall, who didn't speak with a Scottish accent, sadly, and I'll tell a funny story. This is Terry, who's just trying to not to laugh at some joke. This is Peter, who was the youngest. He's probably about 10 or 11. This is John, who was probably one of the oldest. This is Joe. He was much taller than he should have been. He's only 13 or 12 or something. This is Ray here. This is Robert. This is Greg. This is Alan. He was one of the younger ones as well, but they're probably about 12. What we don't have here is some of the big, more thuggy kind of guys. But this is the only photo. Somehow I've ended up with only 2 things from my days there at the boys' home. The other one was a library book from our library, stamped St Andrew's Boys' Home. And guess what the book is? The Stories of Father Brown. So I managed to steal a bunch of detective stories of a priest who solves crimes for the coppers. Ended up a priest in a prison chaplain job. Go to the next one, please. This is the gym. Now this gym that was just part of it. This is taken just after it was built. The boys' home was designed by a guy named Philip Cox. Now, Philip Cox won. This is the first big job that he did, and it won an Australian Architect Award called the Sulman Medal for Architecture of Australia or something or other. Philip Cox retired a few years ago, but the last big project he built from his company is the courthouse just down the road. So, I mean, it's just ironic. And when I heard that he built this, I emailed him and I said, hey, I was a boy at the boys' home way back then. And so, in a way, your buildings are bookmarked parts of my life, you know. And the architecture here, the beams and the bricks and everything is very distinctive. Anybody been to the Agricultural College at Tokau will see this architecture because Philip Cox designed that as well at a similar kind of time. Now, the thing with this gym, just something I want to point out, I said I'd tell a bit of something about Duncan. You see this walkway here, and it comes up through these doors, and there's another building through there, all glass. Now, go to the next picture, please. This is Google Earth. Google Earth is just such a wonderful thing. Now, this is the gym. And so this is the edge of the thing, that colonnade, and this is the building that you could see that I pointed out, and this is the dining room. This part here, the dark piece, is a fireplace 8 or 10 feet wide. And on each side along here there's a glass panel and a glass panel, and you come to the end, and then you come down and you walk in this direction into the door of the dining room. So the day Duncan McDougall arrived there, still in my head after all these years, I've never seen this before or since, but he was just fooling around down at the gym, and we got called up for tea. Everybody's up there. He stayed there not realising that tea time means tea time, and so we had to yell out for him, Duncan, get up here. So we could see, you imagine this is the fireplace. Everyone's sitting out there, and there's a window here, and there's a window where that speaker is, and Duncan came running, and you saw him run past, disappeared behind the fireplace. Now, instead of walking down there and turning left and coming down into the steps about a metre below this walkway, he saw everyone in there and he turned left. He gets it. And he jumped right through a plate glass window. And everybody just stopped. And here's this kid, and he's standing there, and it was like watching the Roadrunner cartoons, where if you keep running, you don't fall. That's the rule. And he was just standing there, and bits of glass were still tinkling. It seemed to go on for a long, long while. Everybody was just arrested in that moment, and he's just stunned look on his face. And then everyone suddenly said, what, the something or other? And are you all right? And all that happened to him was a bit of a scratch on one side of one calf. That was it. You could have done it. If you had scraped a knitting needle, you probably would have done so much damage. That's the story of Duncan. I've never seen anybody run through a window and That's just the funny story. Let's go to the next picture. It's nothing to do with my sermon. It's just that I don't often get to tell a story of a guy who ran through the window. The thing about Google Earth is you can go back. Each time the satellite goes over taking photos, the most recent one appears on Google Earth, but the others are still archived. And you can flick back through them. So the one that we had before, now there's a change, you see. So here's Bell Tower and Bell Tower Park. And that's where the Bell Tower, the swimming pool wasn't there in my day. It's where the Bell Tower was. It's gone. But look at this. It's gone. It's being demolished. Next slide, please. And look at that. Can you see what's happening here? They're taking the thing apart. I mean, I looked at this. I go back through Google Earth and looking at this when I was chasing this up. And there's something really happening inside me about grief. Go to the next one, please. And now here we are. This is where it all was. Nothing. But look at this down here. Brand new car park. Do you know why? There's a place here called MacArthur Developments. Guess what's going to happen? Next slide, please. Here we go. So this is where the boys' home used to be. See this road? And now they've got a big street. There's that office. This is where we used to live. And here is now a shopping centre. Next slide, please. And that's what it looks like now. And this part here, right underneath that little area in there, is that bell tower. It's difficult. When you go back, I just found this very difficult to go back to. And I thought, I used to live here. And now, you know, if I was to sell my house, I don't know if anybody here, there's a few people here probably seen my house. It's a nice place. And if I was to sell my house, I could almost afford to buy a block of land in here. If I wanted to buy a house, they go for 1.1, 1.2 million, up to about 2 million. And that's a lot of money. And you can see, look how much yard they've got. Nothing. They all finish within a metre of all their boundaries. Some of them have got enough room to, if you want a dog, you've got to get one of these ones, I suppose. But this is where all those buildings were. And the bell tower is actually pretty well on the spot of looking back through the way Google Earth is, because all their boom, 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 you know, all their sort of dimensions and stuff are there all the way through. I wonder, let me see on, okay, it's time we finished. I just want to say this one thing. I think that's the last picture, isn't it? Yeah, that's the last one. I tell the story of Duncan because it's a light-hearted thing and it's scary and it's amazing, and you think, how can some 11-year-old kid sort of, you know, just do that? Well, he did it. And if he didn't do it, somebody else might have done it sooner or later. You never know. Well, all I remember is when the new panel glass went in, it had one of those white strips along it to say, don't run past here, which didn't happen. It wasn't all that fun stuff, because that boys' home is the site of one of the biggest traumas in my life, when I was attacked very savagely by a group of people. And my fight against it left one boy lying on the ground, and I didn't know whether he was alive or dead. And I walked backwards away from that, and I got back to my room, and I pulled myself into my own little submarine, and I wound the hatch down, and I stayed there for the next 3 or 4 years in a state they call dissociation. Dissociation is when your brain turns off the body and the pain of outward things. I'd learned to do that when I was a child. When I was 4, my family disintegrated and I was put into care, and 2 years I lived under the care of a woman who was brutal, who broke bones and strangled me. So I've got x-rays, adult x-rays that show broken bones that were never repaired and damage to my trachea that the doctors, I've got no idea. That's a great amount of trauma. I've never seen anything like that, because she used to strangle me, choke me. But the nightmares and the flashbacks continued for decades. When I was 20, people started to talk to me about Jesus, and it was as if Jesus said, we can fix this if you want to. Also, when I was 20, I had two detectives came knocking on my door. They were chasing down crimes that led to me, which was justifiable because I was guilty. And Jesus said, we can fix this if you want to. And out of that, things started to change in my life. I made changes, Jesus made changes. 10 years later, I trained for the ministry. And I was in the ministry for quite a while. I got a scholarship to go to England, to university for postgraduate work, where I did a PhD. And the chaplain needed some assistance in the local jail. And he went to the bishop, and the bishop said to him, Michael, the chaplain said to me later, the bishop said, we got this Australian guy at the university reading for his doctorate. I can't imagine he's got much to fill in his day. And unfortunately, that one time only ever, the bishop was right. But I started working in the jail, and I thought, I'm more comfortable in here than I am in the university. The university was a highfalutin thing, University of Exeter. It's always listed amongst the sort of upper echelon of English universities. And we had students who would, one girl, Kay and I sort of became aunt and uncle to the Christian Fellowship. And one girl, her car broke down, so Daddy just sent the credit card and she went and bought herself a BMW. Second year university student. I felt more at home in the jail than I did there. We came back to Wagga and I was asked to be what they call the official visitor at the Juvenile Justice Centre. So I started doing that. And once again, it was going back to these boys, to Mark and Robert and Joe and the boys who I showed there. I was like, these are my people. These are my people. 60 years ago, I can remember their names. And so going back is a thing. Jesus says, let's take these chains off and we'll send you back. So then I was invited to take on the chaplaincy at Bathurst Jail. And I said, yeah, I can do that. And I thought, boy, this sure is home. And people used to say, how do you cope with being a chaplain? Just the same sort of thing that Tom said. And I said, I get to hang around with the people my mum wouldn't let me play with when I was growing up. It got to the point after Kay started to hear about my life, she said, you know that thing about the kids your mum wouldn't let you hang around with? And I said, yeah. And she said, you're telling that the wrong way round, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And she said, you're the one who their parents didn't want their kids to hang around with. I said, that was it. Maybe one day I'll tell further of the story. I want to just leave you with a couple of things. Jesus walks into people's lives and he takes the chains off. And then guess what? He puts people in their right mind. And then guess what? We want to follow him, and we do, and he says, I want you to go back. And we do. And when we're in our right mind, people can see it. That video that Tom showed, that guy was saying his visitor knew him somehow. He spoke about his own life, and he could talk freely. So there's a bit of right-mindedness coming. So this is one thing I want to leave with you. I apologise for being late, but that's what happens when I don't have enough notes to go word for word like I usually do. Just imagine had I just written it all on a yellow sticky note. Jesus undoes the chains of anybody's life. And if there are chains on your life, Jesus undoes them. And if there are things which are internal, Jesus puts people back in their right mind. And the second thing is that sometimes God will call you to go back. He'll say, Greg, how'd you like a job as a penguin? And Greg says, what? And then Kim comes along and explains what that means. And you'll say, yeah, I'll be a penguin. I'll go back. I'll go back. And that's where I'm going to leave it.